So hello everybody and welcome to CoHo BC's co-owners panel, where we have a really wonderful set of people who've come to talk about their experience in co-ownership and in co-homes. And we have a wide mix of people with a wide mix of experiences who will be joining us today. So thank you to our panelists and thank you to everybody who has taken time out of their busy schedules to come online with us and hear these stories. And we look forward to hearing your questions and your thoughts on this later in the presentation. So before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we do operate and live and love the unceded ancestral territories of many First Peoples, including the Esquimalt and Songhe on the island, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam in Vancouver, Coquitlam, and many more. And we are thankful for this land that they stewarded for many years. And we take a moment to acknowledge the complexities of talking about real estate and home ownership on land that has deep ancestral, spiritual, and legal ties to other people. So what is CoHo BC? Who brings us here together today? CoHo BC is an initiative to promote co-ownership as a viable housing option here in British Columbia, to provide resources through professional support to groups going through the co-ownership process, to assist in the creation of co-ownership groups through a dating pool and supporting initiatives that are out there and helping them connect with people. And I can talk about some of the initiatives that are happening right now after. And we work to facilitate the resale of shared property interests to potential future buyers and partners. Who are we? We are a collection of professionals with experience in co-ownership and collectivity, realtors, lawyers, builders, financial institutions, architects, mediators, and more, because too many people are doing this and reinventing the wheel and making mistakes. So use the experts, guide you through, and make sure you do it right. Who am I? I am a realtor who specializes in this, in co-ownership, and more broadly in sustainable living, green homes, basically real homes for real people, and thinking a little more creatively about housing. And I'll be your moderator today, and happy to follow up with any questions for people about co-ownership, CoHo, and or how it compares to the traditional market. Well, our main reason here today is to hear from our amazing panelists. So welcome and thank you, panelists. We have 5 panelists here today. Luke has joined us. Thank you, Luke, for making it. We have Luke, David, Leah, Jennifer, and Carter working backwards up the list. And I will let them introduce themselves and tell you their stories as they go through. But thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day and for sharing with us your experiences with co-ownership, co-living, and for answering the questions that we will have. So we might as well jump right into it. I've asked each of the panelists to talk a little bit about their experience, and then we will open it up for questions. I did not warn them about who was going to be put on the spot first. So Jennifer and Carter, as you can see, that is you. This is a picture, well, you'll explain, this is a picture of them in their shared backyard with Jennifer's laneway house in the back. So thank you both for coming, and please tell us a little bit about your story, your experience, what has worked for you, what has been a challenge for you, why this was an exciting opportunity for you in the first place. Fill us in on your experience with co-ownership.
Sure, yeah, I'll start off. And I'm not terribly organized with this, so Noam, if you ever want to give me any prompts or anything, jump in. But I was just going to basically start off with a little background about myself, and Jen can introduce herself, and then how we got to where we are with buying this place. So I'm a husband to Rihanna, you can see in the picture, and two boys, now 6 and 8 years old. Um, and we're from the United States. We actually moved to Vancouver in almost exactly 4 years ago. Um, and we moved from probably what is one of the lowest cost of living places in North America to Vancouver, which is one of the highest cost of living places in Vancouver, which we knew coming into this, so it wasn't a surprise, but it certainly presented a challenge for us coming in. And so we moved to a townhouse right off of, that we rented right off of Commercial Drive that happened to be 3 doors down from Jennifer, which is how we met. And my wife and I, pretty early on after moving here, were talking about co-housing to each other because we knew that we would need some help financially to get together a down payment to buy a place in Vancouver. So that was really our primary motivation, but we also really appreciated the idea of having a close neighbor and having the sense of community that came with that. So for both those reasons, it seemed to be a good fit for us. And early on, we met a family, also with 2 young kids at the time. They've since had a third, that was also interested in co-buying. And we looked a bit, we talked to Noam at that point. We looked a bit, and we didn't get too far into the process before Rhiannon and I discovered that my Canadian work permit that we moved here on wasn't enough to get us past the foreign buyer's tax. That we needed to get permanent residency. So that put everything on hold for a bit. And kind of fast forward to late 2019 and early last year, we had lost touch with the other family. We'd been talking with Jen about the possibility of co-buying at that point, and she seemed to be keen on the idea. And then we started to get serious about it. So I don't know, maybe you want to say like what was attracted to you about the idea?
Yeah, so I'm also an American immigrant into Vancouver. I moved here in 2008. Although my transition was very different from Carter and Rhiannon's, I moved from the California Bay Area, and I had bought a house in 2004 and then was trying to sell it after the financial crisis in 2008. It actually took me about 1.5 years to sell that house. And so I was very, and having moved to Vancouver and the booming real estate market, I basically thought I was never going to be able to own a house here, at least in the city of Vancouver, without moving out to the suburbs. So that was my sort of, I hadn't even taken seriously purchasing until Carter and Rhiannon started talking to me about this. And then because this set of townhouses that we lived in it's a small 8-unit building, and we had all sort of moved in at the same time, so there was a really nice sense of community had developed amongst most of the units who had been living there for 2.5 years by the time we started talking about that. So it felt like we already had this very nice kind of local residential community that we could build upon. So yeah, we started looking probably not quite, maybe I was sort of thinking like, I'll be curious to kind of see what sorts of things are available. But for me, I think it got really serious maybe about May of last year.
Yeah.
And we looked at a lot of properties.
And right. And so we looked at a lot of properties. And I remember, I think at least Rhiannon and I were really starting to get serious right about the time the pandemic hit. And so that also put a lot of uncertainty into our process and to what we were doing. But as things got to the point where we could actually look at houses again, yeah, we started to look at, I remember looking at a lot of different houses. And I think that was, after going through getting our permanent residency, the second biggest challenge was finding a property that we all three of us agreed on, because I mean, even Rhiannon and I often had different ideas on what we wanted. So it was just coming to an agreement on what we all wanted. I think we went into it in principle. We kind of had a lot of thoughts on what we wanted and agreed on that. But then in practice, it I think was a lot more challenging than we anticipated it to be. And to be frank, like I was getting to the point where I was getting frustrated and thinking, I'm not sure this is actually going to go through and work. And so I don't know if you have any.
Just that one piece of advice that Gnome provides is that worksheet to work through about what your desires are and your wants are and what you're willing to compromise. It was so useful to have done that as we were looking at properties and sort of working out what we, you know. I don't think any place would have satisfied 100% of everybody's desires, but working out what was really important and what you were willing to cut back on.
Right. And then early last summer, I think a few things started happening at once. First of all, mortgage rates kept dropping, and so that extended our budget just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, so we could look at a few different houses. And on our side, the US dollar to Canadian dollar exchange rate was peaking right about then, which helped us out in our down payment. So again, that extended our reach just a little bit more. And then we found this place, and I think we happened upon it at a really lucky time, because I mean, we had put an offer on one other place, but it turns out there were probably at least 10 other offers on that place. Ours was probably not even considered. But this place, we liked it.
It had been on the market for several
months. It had been on the
months.
market, and the sellers seemed to be willing to negotiate. So we got them really kind of down right under the ceiling of where we thought we could afford, and it was perfect. And so it was really a lot of things. I just consider ourselves so incredibly lucky that everything came together at just the right time for it to happen. And I've been totally thrilled with how it's worked out ever since.
And one of the big things was that I think I imagine that many of you that go into CoHo housing are sort of in similar situations, like the family that Carter was first talking to, right? They're both young families with young kids, whereas what we have here is a young family with young kids and a single person. And so sort of really wanting different needs, and Vancouver has tons of Vancouver specials that I think work for a lot of people who are sort of in a similar grouping. And so I think laneways kind of became the thing that I really wanted, because it would give me that extra privacy, being away from the other residents.
Right. And being away from our noisy children as well.
Well, and you being away from our noisy dogs.
So, but that's kind of, I think, our story up till now in a nutshell. So we moved in here in September of last year, and it's been great. I don't know, and
there's been, so we discovered, for instance, that the buildings are not separately metered for water and sewer, right? So we've had to sort of talk about what usage rates do we want to pay and contribute to that, but everything, all discussions have been very good and transparent.
Yeah, and it helped that we knew each other, I think, fairly well going into this process, so we can put up with disagreements and work through it. So, is there anything else, Noam, that you want us to hit on?
Well, no, thank you. I mean, what do you see as the biggest advantages? I mean, if you had compared this to what you would have done otherwise, what were you contemplating, and how does this?
I can speak to that because, as you know, I was looking at 2-bedroom condos at the same time, and for owning this laneway is probably about $50,000 to $100,000 less purchase price than I would have been able to find a comparable condo, and that's without $400 or $500 a month in strata fees as well. So financially, this is a really amazing benefit.
Right. So I kind of mentioned the two things that I think drew Rhiannon and I to the idea of co-buying was, one, financial, and two was the community that you kind of have built in with that. And I would say it turns out that maybe the financial boost was maybe a little less than I thought it'd be compared to an alternative, which like the other alternative, which would have been us buying something out and renting out the extra space to somebody. So the mortgage helper model, I guess. And maybe Noam would probably be better to talk about what that actual margin is that co-buying gets you. But yeah, it's I think just having a close neighbor in our backyard is really kind of something special that adds to this.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. If people have questions for Carter and Jennifer, we will take questions at the end across the board. You can throw them in the chat and we'll get to them then, or you can save them and ask them in person as we go through. Thank you guys for sharing your experience. So we'll go from the group with the most recent co-purchasers, and that was Rhiannon. Sorry, Rhiannon's not here, but Carter and Jennifer. We'll go on to Leah, who is not in itself herself a co-owner, but who grew up in a co-ownership situation and was surrounded by it her entire life. So the longest of our co-owner experiencers. So Leah, I will hand the floor off to you. And thank you once again so much for coming here today.
No, it's my pleasure. I think it's a perfect order you've created, Noam, because we just heard from Jennifer and Carter and Rhiannon. So this would be like the presentation that Carter, your kids are giving in 20 years, is what I'm about to share. Because I grew up in a house that was jointly owned by my parents and my godparents. So I'm here to talk to you about the joy of growing up in a jointly owned duplex. So let me share my screen. Can people see my screen?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, okay, awesome. So I've titled this presentation, Two Families, One House, A Tale of Care and Community. And I heard the word community come up in Jennifer and Carter's presentation. So I'm gonna go into detail a bit more about what the community was like for me growing up in a jointly owned house or co-housing situation. So in a fair 1980s Vancouver is where we lay our scene, but that is where the similarity to the warring Mountain Capulets ends, because rather than warring Italian dynasties, my story starts off with a bunch of good friends. So allow me to introduce the players in this story. Oops. First, we have Marlene, a school teacher. She's actually, both of my parents are here hiding with their videos off, but they are here in the audience. Our second player is Michael, husband to Marlene and a college instructor. So those are my parents. The next is Susie, an artist. And last, yes.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt, but you may want to switch off from the headphones and go directly to speaking in. We're having a little bit of a delay.
Okay. Okay, let me switch from headphones.
A little louder?
Is that better?
Much better, thank you.
Something about the headphones recently, I've been having a lot of trouble. Do you want me to start again?
I think we heard it, it's okay, but this is much better for going forward.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so here are the people that bought a house together. The top two are my parents, the bottom two are my godparents. We can't forget who actually runs the show here. Here are some of the beasts that came along for the ride over the course of the co-housing experience. Okay, all good tales start with a problem. The problem in this case was one couple had dreams of home ownership, but houses were too expensive. So we had two individual couples independently wanting a house, but both independently not being able to afford. So this is a comedy and not a tragedy. There will be a solution. The solution comes in the form of this house on West 2nd Avenue, which the players jointly bought in 1980. It's an up and down duplex. So my parents and I lived on the top part of the house, and my godparents and their 2 kids lived in the main floor, and there is even a rental suite in the basement part of the house. So the house cost a total of $159,000 in 1980, which is about $500,000 today. So you can all, tear your hair, collectively scream. We're just in a bit of a different market situation now, but that was what they were able to buy in 1980 as 4 people. And as I said, it was a comedy. There's got to be a punchline. Everyone told the players, buying a house with friends is a terrible idea. You're not going to get along. Somebody's going to want to leave. It's a bad idea to go into business with your friends. How are you going to manage the situation? And the joke is, we're still laughing 41 years later, as my dad likes to say. Okay, so the 4 players soon brought 3 more little players into the mix. In 1983, we have Julian in the Superman cape. I was born in 1984, and then we have Sammy, who was in 1990. So I titled this presentation Care and Community. So I'll just focus on some pictures around care and then some pictures around community. They probably could all just fall into both categories, but I feel like 2 C's is a good way to go. So from the adult's perspective, let's look at childcare. On the left, you can see my godfather, Hartley, with me as a kid. And on the right, you see Susie with a very tiny me in a Blue Jays hat and Julian. So you can imagine that for young working parents, adult to child ratio of 4 to 3 is pretty awesome. And then from the perspective of an only child, which I am an only child, it was great to have these kind of brother-like creatures running around the house, and we had lots of fun together growing up. In fact, Julian and I planned to get married, but we thought we couldn't get married because we were related. So we actually saw ourselves as a family. It was only later that I realized that we weren't actually like blood related. We didn't end up getting married, but so here is Sammy's first birthday party, and this was me feeding Sammy vegetables. I had a special technique for airplaning them into his mouth. And then community, as Jennifer and Carter shared, we spent many happy hours together. On the left, you can see us painting our fingernails with Susie in the background. And actually, you can't see her. You can just see a little tiny bit of her hair, but the daughter of the woman who was living in the basement also joined us. So she has her nails painted too, and we all used to play and hang out, and there were lots of kids in the neighborhood. And then on the right is going to be the one and only picture of our apple tree, because it was a very sick and dying apple tree. I think this was the only time it ever yielded any fruit, which is why we're looking so pleased with ourselves. And then another thing is that when you join 2 families or 2 groups of people, you not only create a new community with yourselves, but we also got to know each other's extended family. So this is from left to right, my aunt, Susie's mom Yetta, and my granny Lim all enjoying the sun on my parents' deck together. And this is the final picture. So this is all of us all together. So 2 families in one house, one celebration, and we all still love spending time together, even though, so Sammy, the little one, he's living in Cambodia right now with his partner Marie and their new baby Lewis. And Julian on the right lives in Palm Springs with his wife Becca and their 2 daughters, Nola and Lucy. But my parents and my godparents all still live in the house that they bought together 41 years ago. So that's it.
Wow, well, thank you. That was really, you could really see it. You could really see, what it's like to be in that space. So, okay, well, again, if you have questions for Leah, we will take them at the end, throw them in the chat or share when we get to that. Our next presenter is David. David, who will tell about himself, but who is actually a realtor in Victoria, and will tell you a little bit about how he decided to fund his retirement by selling a portion of his own home. So, David, please take it away.
Okay. Looks like I've got.
I hope I didn't give away the punchline there.
Let me see if I can get set up here. Okay, can you see that screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just get the slideshow from the beginning so you can hear me okay and see me okay. Good. Awesome. Well, I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight and for being interested in shared home ownership. I started Shared Home Ownership Victoria about 4 years ago, I guess, 2017. And my wife and I are snowbirds, so we've been traveling in our motorhome for the last 5 years down south in warmer climates. California, Arizona. My wife has a daughter and 2 grandsons in Phoenix, so we love to take the motorhome down there and explore. And this fellow jumping on the screen here is me, believe it or not. And it looks like I'm jumping in the snow, but you notice I have bare legs and feet. So that's not snow. That is the White Sands National Park in New Mexico, believe it or not. So if anyone's been there, it's a pretty fun place. But it looks like snow, and you sort of drive through the snowbanks like it was snow. So anyhow, my dream, of course, has been, to educate people on shared home ownership, and I'm just glad to see so many people are on board with that at this presentation today. So a year ago, we got chased out of the States due to COVID, and it was a little scary. Nobody knew what was going on. I was kind of freaking out. We didn't have a place to go because we had rented our home out while we were away. And of course, we came back prematurely. So we called up some friends, and they had an acreage, and they said, come on out. And so that's where our motorhome has been for the last 15 months. So, some of the other things that happened, of course, like I didn't have any income, real estate market shut down. We fortunately were able to get CERB. We were able to defer our mortgage. So we kind of hunkered down and changed real estate companies and just really brought, our expenses to, as low as they possibly could be. One day, my wife, Judy, and I were basically, within an hour of each other, we came up with the whole idea that we should talk to Melissa and Derek, who were friends of ours, about buying the upper portion of our house. So this is where we live. It's a 3-story townhouse with a legal suite in the basement. So essentially, that's the way it was spot zoned, and so it's all legal that way. So we said, well, why don't we sell the 2/3 upstairs to Derek and Melissa? So they were living in this condo, and the condo was 555 square feet. And over a period of time, they had a young one, and all of a sudden he was 2 years old. And so the challenge was that they gave the bedroom to the little guy, Jackson. And so they moved their bed out into the living room. And then, of course, they didn't have room for their couch. So the couch had to go. So you can imagine they were living in pretty cramped quarters. And if that wasn't, the whole story, the lady that moved in downstairs, we could say was less than tolerant and was banging on the ceiling all the time because this little 2-year-old was running around. So anyhow, it was a very unpleasant situation. And they, felt like they were prisoners in their own home. So they were very, very happy to accept our offer to buy the upstairs 2 floors. So now all of a sudden they're living in 1,600 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a nice place with granite counters and so on. A galloping goose in behind the property, and a school just almost right across the road with a playground, lots of playgrounds around. So they're just thrilled. So essentially, I thought what I'd do is just break down the financing a little bit on this. Now the home, let's say, has a value of 600,000. And I know that a lot of you will be chuckling because you're from the Lower Mainland, Vancouver area, where the average price is probably about 1.7 mil. Here in Victoria, it's about $1 million now. So, but just for comparative purposes, the actual value of the home, say, was around 600. So the upstairs would have been worth 400,000. So there, because the interest rates are so low these days, we did this transaction in September. So we sort of hit about the bottom, which was fortunate for us. So upstairs, they pay about $1,500 a month, and 65% of that payment goes back to principal. So basically back in their pocket in the form of principal pay down, and then $525 is interest. So if you want to extrapolate that over 5 years or 60 months, $975, the principal pay down equals about $58,500. And then if you said that the property appreciates about 3% per year, over 15 years, that would be about 15%. So that would work out to $60,000. So you add those 2 numbers together, 58,500 and 60. In 5 years, you've got 118,500 in equity in the house. Now, of course, we had to leave 20% equity in the property to start with. So theoretically, if our partners wanted to refinance with our approval, of course, they could draw out in 5 years 118,000 to put into investments if they wanted to. So the downstairs, approximately 200,000. Our payments are like $700 a month, which is pretty crazy. 455 is principal, $245 interest. So you extrapolate that over 5 years. So 60 months times 455 principal, we've gained about 27.3 in 5 years. And then again, use the formula, 3% a year, 15% over 5 years. So there's about 30,000 there. So you add those 2 numbers together. Now you've got about 57,300 in equity. So we could say to our partners, in 5 years, we've done a 5-year joint venture, and the deal is that we sell after 5 years. But of course, we can change our minds. So we could say to them, how about you buy us out, or we could buy them out. Or we could say, let's just do it another 5 years. Or, we might want to pull some money out, put it into investments. So lots of different ways we could go. So basically, what we've done in 1 year is essentially gone from having no money, collecting CERB. All our investments were locked in. The equity in the house was not accessible. And we had lots of stress and uncertainty. And then we were able to, just by, thinking outside of the box and creating an opportunity for ours, we were able to sell 2/3 of the house. And we've been able to invest that money in investments that are making great returns. We've created passive income of over $8,000 a month. As a matter of fact, today we just put a deposit down on a nicer motorhome. And as soon as we get our second COVID shot, we're going to be on the road and traveling for the next year. And what we're doing is creating freedom and peace of mind. So essentially, that's a quick story on what people can do if they think outside the box. They have a home that they can sell part of, help someone else out, help themselves. And so I've started another website called financialfreedomfighter.net with the idea of showing people how to produce financial freedom, abundance, and adventure. So that's what I'm up to these days. And then adios soon.
Well, thank you, David. It definitely, I think, is a vision that I think makes a lot of sense for a lot of people, that they don't realize is you don't have to sell your house, you don't have to move, you don't have to totally change your life to access the equity, and you don't have to take on huge debt to access the equity. There are other options. So wonderful. Thank you very much. And now our last panelist of the day is Luke. Luke, I'm sorry I did not have a picture of you. So I put this together a little last minute to ask for one. But I'm assuming you look just like this. So Luke, thank you. Look forward to hearing your story and the story of Dreamhouse.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Noam. Yeah, so my story starts in New Zealand, not unlike Luke Skywalker in the middle of nowhere, where business was done by a handshake. And I grew up with the common idea of selling your house without a realtor and selling it to someone you knew, and often financing the next people in often a handshake agreement. Few things jotted down on a scrap of paper about how much money is owed or how it would be paid, but holding private mortgages essentially for each other. I don't know how actually common it was, but it was certainly a thing that was done, and it was a thing that kind of helped both parties, help things work. And so fast forward to my parents immigrating to North America. So I grew up back and forth between both, and found my way to Vancouver, and Vancouver being my city of choice to live in the world. And I was living in Kitsilano for 7 years in my early 20s, and in a pretty stable rental situation that we just kind of imagined hope that we'd be in forever. I grew up with the idea of buying a house and having a family was the normal way, a nuclear family. And but I had decided it was a new world, and I actually was going to deviate from that plan and not buy a house, and live with the kind of mortgage-free financial freedom kind of model, and until we got renovated out of our house. So a classic Vancouver story. The owner wanted to renovate and potentially sell or increase the rent drastically as property values started to go up. That house was a 3-suite house in Kitsilano, pretty typical kind of Kits house. And we got together with the other people in the other suites, and we decided to try to buy that house from the owner. So one of the other suites and our collection of friends or roommates in the other suite got together and put in an offer. And I think at that time the offer was about 1.4 million. And that was taking several financial entities together and everything we could imagine to kind of do it. And the owner said no, held on, and I think he sold for about 2.7 million not too long later. So we moved and we said, well, it's time to buy a house, and we want a house to have housing stability. So an old dream of mine came back for kind of a different reason, rather than for hosting kids and family, but for hosting our group of friends and like-minded kind of life livers. We identify as being in the alternative community, and so we gravitated to Commercial Drive. So we started looking for a house to buy, and we thought this is actually challenging. So we're gonna take some time and look for the right place. We imagined we needed to get the worst house on the best street that we could find. And we imagined that we would probably have something like 8 bedrooms, or build 8 bedrooms into a cool kind of collective house, and make it work somehow. And we imagined would probably buy a nightmare and make it happen with the power of our goodwill, and create something that was safe for all of us. So we moved out towards Commercial Drive, renting while we were still looking, but that was the first time we formalized the collective. So we moved in 5 friends together, and we had other people involved who were also wanting to take part in various degrees. Some people had money, some people had some savings, some people had access to some loans through the bank of your parents, and some people were just ready to work and do kind of whatever it took to work and build to get there. So we imagined that we would find a place in about 6 months. This was in 2012, and we thought property prices were crazy then. So it took us 18 months, and we'd actually given up. We had said property prices are too high. They're not dropping. They seem to be going up. And we had put an offer on a couple of places with slightly different mixed collectives of the people involved each time. But we were living together, and we were creating our collective kind of social experiment at the time. And so we were getting to know each other and what we wanted. And we did a lot of visioning, and we made one great piece of paper in the end that was visioning of everything kind of high in the sky that we wanted in terms of a house, and high ceilings and fireplace, and on a bicycle route, and adjacent to a park, and not on a busy street. And so it came to about the 18-month point, and we had decided we're gonna wait for some time. We're gonna wait for a crash. And just as we relaxed, one of our people in our extended community, in our kind of shifting group, we probably had about 10 people who were involved, and probably 5 people a time in each kind of put together bidding process. And it was so touch and go on bidding that a lot of it came down to trust and belief in each other, which we had pretty complete trust and belief in each other, that we would be able to work out the details. I mean, we did talk a lot about ironing out the financial details, but there were going to be so many things, if we did get a successful offer in, that would work out later. So one of our people was walking on Lakewood, or biking on Lakewood Drive, and they saw a house for sale by owner. And so they had biked over to our place, and they said, "Hey, I just saw the coolest house. Like, it feels good." And so a bunch of us a bunch of us went over, knocked on the door. Sure enough, it was for sale by owner. We didn't meet the owner that day, but he had leaflets on his door, and we made a meeting for a few days later. And we walked in, and the house just grabbed us for sure. I can honestly say that it was the clearest, challenging decision of my life. So of a big decision, after we had visioned, after we'd put in time looking, after we'd kind of put in offers and negotiated with each other with some kind of different groups of what we were going to do, walking into this house that I'm in right now, we walked through, and the owner resonated with us. It was wonderful meeting the owner, and he was a kind of old socialist hippie guy, had lived here for 30 years. He was a prof at Capilano College, had quit in protest when they cut funding to arts programs, and the house was just too much house for him in the end, and he was moving into a co-op in West Van. And so I asked him on spur of the moment, because I just loved the way of being able to deal with the owner directly and negotiate or have some outside the normal system power potential to negotiate. And I asked him if he'd ever considered holding a private mortgage. And he hadn't, but he liked the idea. And he really liked the idea of supporting us, of his house going to a collective, and him doing what he could to facilitate that. So we went away, looked at some numbers, came back, talked about a few things, and it seemed possible. If we came back and could make the right numbers work for the mortgage payments and so on, and get enough down, we could make it work. So we actually shook hands on it that day, and we said, okay, we'll work it out. We'll come to a fair price, and we'll split all the costs. So we'll split all the transfer of ownership. We would pay the incoming property taxes to buy it, but legal costs, would use our own lawyers, and so we did. So we had a personal negotiation. It was wonderful. I had a friend of my brother's wife, who's a mortgage lawyer, and so she took us on. We wrote our own mortgage agreement. We wrote our own sales agreement. We had them edited by our mortgage lawyer. She was very challenged by the process, and we pushed hard to do it as an amicable process with the bare minimum of legal advice. And we pushed her to her limit. And by the time it was done, she said that was the most amicable purchase she'd ever done, including between family members. And so the old owner, Craig Hathaway, and us, we just ideologically agreed on all the things, and that made it immensely easier to do. And I can identify with something Carter and Jennifer had mentioned, or Carter, that by the time the process was done, it was so difficult, just so many parts to make happen, the purchase of that home for us, that we almost gave up on it. If there'd been a few more obstacles, we would have said, no way, this is not doable. We were forging our own way, kind of reinventing the wheel. We didn't have some of the support that I think Noam and other people have access to these days. But it was a value-laden, wonderful process, and that was incredibly fueling, and it still is for us. And a lot of people have come through and said that we're really living in line with our values here, and we are in these ways. And so we negotiated an agreement, and we put together $200,000 down, 215,000. He held a $500,000 mortgage for us, and 5-year minimum. And we paid actually more interest than we would have paid at the bank, because we agreed on this egalitarian kind of consensus process where we try to offset compared to some of the investments he had going, where he was earning a higher interest rate. So that was something I didn't expect. We paid a little bit higher, but we had our own mortgage agreement with no bank on title, no rates to inspection, no needs to contact for doing major renovations. We wrote our own simplistic agreement. We took care of each other's needs in there in some complex ways, just with an open consensus-based process. And we were really honestly both there to support housing. Nobody was there to make a lot of money, although, I mean, Craig had been there for 30 years. His property had gone up 10 times in value. We've now been here 8 years, and our property has gone up probably about 2.6 times in value. So I heard the 3% figure earlier, but ours is more like 13%. That's not taking into account property taxes or interest or maintenance improvement costs. And so, but we were all about just having a safe home for us. So we actually moved in before the transaction had taken place fully. We took the money in a mix of cash and checks and put it directly into his bank account, the other owners. The lawyers could not believe it. They almost convinced us to, but we did it. It was just fine. We had nice human faith and trust. And a mishmash group of us all buying into different percentages, all with that representative kind of stake of equity, came in. And then we'd been living together for 18 months as a collective. We continue, and today I'm the only one who's still here from the original 5. But some of the original 5 are still part of the collective, but not currently living here. And the collective is probably larger than the current occupants of the house. And today we're actually looking to extend into the nature-based part of the collective. So we're looking for land on Sunshine Coast or Salt Spring or Vancouver Island. And we're looking to come into another worst house on the best block. We're looking for a dilapidated house, big house and barn, or 2 cottage and some land to build and extend the collective, perhaps with people being back and forth between here and there. Again, we don't know the details, but we have the ability to flow according to who's present, who has money to invest. And a lot of the opportunity was made with this 5-year private mortgage. At the end of the 5 years, our benefactor came to check with us. After 5 years, the agreement moved to 1-year notice for pulling out any funds. And so he gave the 1 year notice, actually at the 4-year mark, and said he'd probably want to pull it out as long as we could survive. And so at that point, we launched an investment collective. So in the community, I also do some investment education. I have some background in finance, and I was a math teacher. And we have a lot of connections who support us here. So we have our good friends of the house, or we have a financial planning lawyer and an accountant, and who are all happy to help out on little things when needed. And they believe in us and what we're doing. So people are happy to help. And so we had people who had money to invest, preferred it not to be with banks, and wanted to have something that was safe and good. So we came up with this model of the investment collective where people could invest in the house, either in having an equity share or just invest in holding the mortgage and being paid interest. So we did that all with private contracts. With our original owner, we did register the mortgage, but with subsequently with the investment collective, it's not registered, it's just private contracts. Essentially, they're trust-based, and I like the saying, life moves at the speed of trust. And we put a lot of effort into honoring each other and honoring those things, working hard for each other. So that's been going for 3 years now, and it's been great. We've continued to find people who had interest in investing in something they believed in. It wasn't investing in guns or drugs or war. And we negotiated interest rates between 2% and 3.5%. So sometimes higher, generally higher than the bank would be, but we believe in it, and it's a successful part of us here. So some people have bought in and then sold out. So if people want to sell, there's a 1 year minimum, so 1 year notice. Then for that 1 year, we look for other people to buy in. Luckily, I had enough equity and flexibility to pick up the slack if we run into a difficult time. So people have given that notice. We have evaluation of the property process, and then they get paid out their equity share. And so by having a flexible system with enough people involved, it's just floated quite well. And we have several layers of safety, and we continue. And every time we really need some more investment, we put out more feelers for it. And so far we've found it each time. It's been really wonderful, and our investors have loved it. They've generally been investors who wanted to be in for only 1 to 2.5 years. It's been relatively frequent turnover, and we're here today. We love it. We've been renovating the house as we go. It's part of our house ideology and collective that we're an egalitarian, consensus-based collective. The financial investment collective and the house ownership collective and the kind of occupation decision-making collective of the people who are living here all overlap, really like each other. The people have moved in and out, and the best friends have moved in and out, including some parents or different people in our lives at times. We've built a lot of goodwill, and we support each other through that. And it's so we feel a deep resonance with each other, and we go on in a decided family group here. We've almost become a baby house several times. People living here have thought about having children here, and it's almost gone that way. And I could see it quickly going that way. Like we have a sister collective that has gone that way. And I think probably a good percentage of the time ours would have gone that way, but it hasn't right now. And so it's all just adults living here, no children. But we're open to that evolution. And right now we're considering opening up to having, it's all one suite to the house. We could build a basement suite in it. No laneway house possible here. It's a small piece of land, but it's a big kind of 4-story, 5-bedroom house. But the house really flows quite well as a 5-bedroom collective with the possibility of separating out the basement someday. And we're open to other people buying in, and especially in that kind of nexus of occupying and buying in as well. And that's a really special opportunity for people here. Generally, we've started with a $30,000 minimum for buy-in, just for effort around paperwork. But when people have been trying to save money and trying to invest, and $30,000 is a kind of remote figure for them, we've also given extra and facilitated them investing in, and allowed them to invest and earn interest, or invest and earn equity. And so that's been life-changing for those people as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Luke, for telling us a little about your property. Your home is one of those properties that, every few times a year as a realtor, I see properties that are just really special, and I call up all of my clients and I try to say, you have to buy this home, you have to buy this home. And usually the timing doesn't work, or just doesn't quite work for them the way they don't see the vision the way I see the vision. Only one of those 3 a year does it happen. And this was one of those. I had the pleasure of touring it in advance, or at some point clearly before you bought it, and I fell in love with it and saw the potential in it, and then called up all my clients and didn't have anyone to buy it. And then a couple years later, when I met you on the tour of Collective Homes and saw that you got what you guys had turned it into, I was so excited to see it had turned into it had been handed over to the right people, and had been taken to the next level. So delighted to hear your story and to see what you've done with that property. And I like to talk about your example to people all the time, because what you guys have done is separated your ownership collective from your occupancy collective. And your occupants can be co-owners, they cannot be co-owners and just renters. And it allows you to kind of have a little more flexibility in the model. So thank you for sharing your story. And I'm sure I have questions. I'm sure others will have questions in a moment. So that's where we're coming to in our presentation today, is questions. Before we take the questions, I just want to let people know that we do have a bunch of upcoming events here at CoHo. On June 21st, we'll have our Let's Make a CoHome online social, a chance to meet other people looking to buy collectively and see about setting up your own collectives. On July 6th, we have our mediator, Lisa Barrett, talking about problem solving and advanced planning, so you don't have to problem solve. On July 27th, Richard Bell, leading lawyer in this field, talking about intergenerational living and considerations when it comes to co-ownership with family members. Lisa Dixon, a co-housing consultant and a mortgage broker, will talk about forming co-housing communities and financing in September. And then we also have our general info session all the way in October. Although if you want to know stuff before that, just reach out to me. There's lots of resources on our website, the guide to co-ownership, questions for partnership agreements, examples and stories. There's stuff, again, for finding partners, a survey to fill out. And please reach out if this is the first you're hearing about co-ownership, or you think this might work for you, or you want to compare what you can do, collectively versus personally and traditionally. Reach out to myself, reach out to CoHo, and find out, we can talk about what this is and what it could look like for you. So, and again, I want to just thank our presenters. I'll do it again once at the end, but for really great presentations and really good overviews. I have some questions, but I know a few have come up in the chat already. So I'll start with those. Where did my chat just disappear to? Here we go. Okay, so, all right. And I will bring up all the panelists. So we'll start with Luke, since you were just on, and we have a question directly for you, which is, do you have any prices have gone up about $1 million on property probably since you bought it? So do you have any advice for people trying to do the same thing today versus 9 years ago?
Yeah, I do. So to us then, I mean, buying it, it perhaps seemed equally impossible. And maybe the feeling of impossible is relative, but to us, it seemed crazy, and it seemed out of bound, out of the realm of possibility. And but we just dug into everything possible to make it happen. I guess I can't give advice as to how to make that happen today, although obviously being able to borrow money privately is a useful tool in terms of down payment. Anything out of system, I have generally gone to trying to survive, trying to make things happen out of system through personal relationships with collected groups and trust. I mean, that has been a currency that has been so important. So either building that kind of relationship, and I've continued to build that kind of relationship in the variety of collectives that I'm part of, and that was invaluable. And I did start looking with friends that I'd known for my lifetime, and where we just had that trust we could come together. My orientation had to be to come together, we'll tough it out, we'll have an adventure that if we can succeed through it, will come out a whole lot better. And I wasn't even really thinking of the financial payback that comes. And one problem with our houses being investments or having such a high value now, it makes them harder to get into. But it does have the benefit of there are more built-in returns that come. And my belief is that long-term real estate values in Vancouver, even before that, my dad taught me this when I was young, that real estate values in Vancouver had been going up on a long-term average of something like 10.5%. And I mean, my parents at one point paid 18% interest, but now at paying 2% interest or 1.4% interest, I don't believe that there's an imminent horrendous crash from my lens and my projections that this market, while the jumps are kind of horrifying, that the market is not significantly off of that long-term average. So I think at times we have to restrain our horror, especially our thinking, looking at what property values were like when I was 10 or 5 years ago, or what a dollar was worth then. And we have to look at the situation now. And overall, aside from short-term gains and losses, I think overall this is the housing market for here. And it is still, even though it's so expensive to get into, any way we can group things together, get in, tough it out, learn something, have an adventure, and then a few years later be much better off than we were.
And I think the big lesson from Luke and your story is the collectivity of it. The fact that you were able to partner up with a larger group of friends, plus a larger group of investors and the seller, and really approach it from that nature. And that is certainly still doable today. I also want to ask Jennifer and Carter and David, who have been doing this more recently on this question, what advice do you have for people trying to make this happen? Jennifer, did I see a hand up? Or am I projecting? No.
I can jump in if you want. I think I agree with Luke. Get in. Do whatever you got to do to get in the market, because property values will just keep going up and up. You know, there might be a little dip here and there, but you've got to pay rent to someone, you know, it's the bank, or if it's a for sale by owner, or if it's, you know, you might as well be paying your own mortgage. And you know, the numbers that I shared, 65% of your payment these days is going back in your pocket in the form of principal pay down. So it's just a no-brainer to get as many people together as you need to. You know, just get in the market, because you know, you will eventually you know, win. You will eventually be able to put yourself in a position where you can take some equity out again and travel, retire, whatever you want to do, right? So, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a real estate market watcher, but as I mentioned earlier, my experience was having bought a house before the last financial crisis and then trying to sell it afterwards. I agree that, and part of my reason for wanting to do this is, you know, I'm a decade or so from retirement, and apologies for the barking dog, and having housing stability was really important to me at this time. That the rental market here was becoming equally as problematic. But it's, as long as you sort of have, you're secure in your job and you're not thinking about having to leave in the event of an adverse financial climate. So I would just add a little bit of a cautionary note.
Fantastic, thank you. Let me ask you about some of the big questions and concerns that people tend to have. And I think we've heard a little bit of this from David and Luke specifically, but exit strategy. If you want to talk a little bit about what was their exit strategy, and how do you navigate different, or, you know, what's your plan to make sure that you that everyone can get their money out in a reasonable timeline when they need to, or that you're on the same page on that?
Well, for me, it's a 5-year agreement, joint venture agreement. And that's the way we structure it. So in 5 years, we sell, or we change the agreement. But at least going into the agreement, everybody knows, is on the same page. We know it's a 5-year term. It goes along with a 5-year mortgage, which is usually the best rate. So, you know, at year 4.5, you know, we start talking to your partner. What are you thinking? What do we want to do? So we still have the opportunity to sell our portion to the other party that is a co-owner, or, you know, we all sell together, or we sell a portion. So that's the way we have ours structured.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for us, generally, it's been a 1-year agreement. And ours has also been, so, like I talked about value alignment and support, that ours has always been easy. Some people have put in the 1-year notice, and they've actually desired the money out early. We function with a lot of transparency, so we share those desires. So a common thing, someone might say, okay, I'm putting in notice for 1 year for this portion or the whole thing of my investment. And but I would, you know, love to get it out as soon as possible. That definitely has never come with pressure. It's been very clear support. Even in times where I've had minor conflict in terms of co-owners and in the house, the support for the mutual shared good of the financial system we have has always held. So people might have asked for it earlier, and we've generally been able to give it earlier at those times. So we try to look for a buyer to come in. We try to mobilize things earlier. If we can't pay something out, then the house would go up for sale. It's always the default kind of back end. But people support it so much that I imagine if we really came to a tough spot, that person wanting the money out would work hard to shift things around. And we've definitely had people, we had one couple break up and someone left, and they gave notice for their money coming out. And they also said, but it would also be okay staying in. And so, yeah, I think flexibility and adaptability for us around it has been important too. And if anyone really needs to stay here, or it needs to stay, then they're probably going to work harder than the other people to make sure to draw in new investors or new buyers, or to make it happen themselves.
Thank you. Jennifer, you to share your approach to this?
Sure, and we have our agreement written down, and actually, since we've written it down, I would have to go back and read it to really give an answer to the question, because these sort of details don't stick in my brain. But like, we both came into this thinking long term, thinking like we're planning on at least a 10-year horizon, and possibly longer, hopefully longer. So we don't anticipate either of us wanting to sell our share of the property anytime soon. Of course, things happen. We need to be able to plan for that. And so we do have it in our agreement where we could, say, hey, I need to sell my portion of it. The other party would have right of first refusal, so you could buy it at the market value, buy it out at market value. And if that doesn't work, if the other people couldn't afford it, then there has to be an agreement on who the next buyers
There's an
are.
opportunity to find us the
Right.
buyer.
Right, but everybody has to agree on who that buyer is. So those are some of the details that I recall at this point, and beyond that,
The one that I was thinking of, another thing that sort of worked very complementary for us, is that in terms of kind of when for both of us the kind of next life changes coincided. So Carter's kids are going to be graduating from high school at about the same time that I will be retiring. So it's kind of a perfect moment to then rethink what we then want to commit to after that.
right. And even though we have this agreement, I think there's also this feeling like that there will be flexibility between us. We don't have to do it according to the terms of what we have written down. We're friendly enough, we'll make it work out, right?
Thank you. And Leah, I don't know if you are comfortable speaking to your parents' future, but as they're aging and as they have to look towards estate planning and things of that nature, do they have an agreement in place with their friends about how the property will be dealt with that you know about?
I know that there is an agreement in place, and I can put my parents on the spot since they are here and say if they want, because I don't know any of the details of that agreement, but I know that there is a rigorous legal agreement. Hey, parents, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I'm Leah's dad, even though it says Marlene. Can you hear me?
Yes,
you hear
we
what
can
I'm
hear you.
saying? Yeah, okay. Yes, we have a very similar agreement to what the other people are talking about. One party buys the other out. If that didn't work, then a third party acceptable to the other people could buy into the arrangement. And if nothing worked out, then the house would be sold and we would divide the proceeds.
I'm glad to hear you have the agreement. You did it right, because most people who did this 40 years ago did not bother. They did it on a handshake. And
oh, really? Oh, no.
And that can be fine when you're best friends, but can be a challenge during divorce and estate planning and all sorts of other things that can come up in life. So I'm glad to hear you guys have done it right. We have some other questions here, and again, people are encouraged to throw their questions into the chat. Leah, what kind of place are you living in now, and/or are you looking to live in co-ownership in the future? What does it look like next for you as a child of co-ownership?
That's a great question. So I had such a good experience growing up in a co-owned house that it's it's almost like natural. Oh, wait.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think maybe without them. Is the sound better without my headphones? Yeah, okay. So I had such a great experience growing up in a co-owned house. And it seems to me the most natural way because it's what I grew up in. So it was only later that I found out that that was an unusual situation. And like everything that I've talked about, it has so many benefits and hardly any downsides that I have thought about it very seriously, like for myself too. That's how Noam and I originally got into contact. I have a couple of friends who I have known for a long time, and we may be eventually looking at co-ownership. I think one of the big barriers is the current crazy market. Yeah. So for the moment, I rent a house in East Van, which is just by accident not very expensive. It could be like $1,000 more a month. I don't know why it isn't. It's just the way the landlords just don't charge us as much as they could. But I like what people are talking about, this security. It feels really insecure in this particular rental situation because the house next door, for example, is for sale right now. I know my landlords tried to sell the house before we even moved in. And yeah, so I feel like it could all crumble at any point. So that's another push to towards something like co-ownership in whatever form that is. But for me, the most important thing is being close to my friends and being in that community. And then secondly, the security, because I could find another place to rent.
Thank you. We have a good question here. We've heard 4 really interesting, distinct stories here today, and I think each of them could be told. Do any of you have a blog, any place where you've kind of told your stories? I know Jennifer and Carter, you guys were featured in the Vancouver Sun. I don't know, it doesn't go that in depth into your story. If any of you were to write up your stories, we would certainly feature you on the CoHo website and social media. Any of you have these stories out there in public somewhere where we could go into more depth into your experience? Leah's parents?
So the dream house has been people have asked for it several times. So we have a file of digital files and pictures and papers that we have not made public yet. But someday we'll have to turn that into a story. Maybe that's a good thing for the CoHo BC website. But I also put in the chat our Dreamhouseworks Gmail account. And if anybody wants more info specifically, they can contact us all there through that Gmail address.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else have their written about it at all? David, you have your shared home ownership website. Talk about your experience.
Yeah, I've got shared home ownership victoria.com, and that I created about 4 years ago. So that's a resource. And I've started another website. It's you know, it still needs to be filled in. The financialfreedomfighter.net website. My goal is to have you know, lots of videos on creating financial freedom and abundance and adventure. So I've got some interviews. I still need to get them up. We have a YouTube channel, but there's only like 2 videos up at this point. But I've interviewed a friend of mine from Sudan who's been backpacking the world for like, I don't know, almost 20 years, 15, let's say, and a really interesting character. So, you know, we're looking at the whole, you know, idea of what is financial freedom? What is financial abundance? Does it take a lot of money? Or is it, you know, can it be just, you know, the freedom of lifestyle, you know, selling things, you know, downsizing, becoming a minimalist, that type of thing. What do you want your life to look like? So that's what the website's all about.
Fantastic, thank you. A couple more questions, and I know we're coming up on our 8:30 window here. Question for David from the beginning. Was it significant that the suite in your home is a legal one in terms of splitting and home ownership, or could you have done it if it were not an authorized suite?
Well, that's a good question. I came up with the whole idea 4 years ago that's what I wanted to promote was houses with legal suites. And that way, if you have a challenge with bylaw enforcement, they're not going to come in and snip the wires, on the stove on an illegal suite, right? So my whole, idea was to sell homes that have legal suites in them so that parties can live separately, and live in peace and harmony, and within the law, without having to share a kitchen. And it's kind of cool to listen to Luke and how his consortium gets along, so they must have done a lot of personal development work, and love to talk to you more, Luke, about how you get so many people getting along together. So it's a great concept. And it's just that I went into it with the whole idea that it would be a little easier, to have people buy separate accommodations and, have separate cooking facilities and legally have the right to be there, not have to worry about law enforcement.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. You could do it just as easily with an unauthorized suite, but there's just higher liability that you might end up finding yourself roommates with them or forced to sell.
Yeah.
If you weren't ready. On the flip side of that, I actually have a question for Luke. Have you guys had any issues have you thought about Vancouver city bylaws dealing with rooming houses and more than 3 unrelated adults living together, and how you might deal with that?
Yeah, we haven't had any serious issues, although the specter of it has been there. We've had fears at times. And I do think that relates to the last question about illegal suites. So I like the idea. There's a good life rule, I think: don't break 2 laws at the same time. Because your exposure becomes exponentially more damaging. And so if you're doing something alternative, or you're doing something that's, I do think in a way, maybe the nuclear family in a house might be the system that has the most support within the kind of mainstream system. And if you're doing something else, it gets harder. For us, our one has a lot of returns that we appreciate, but it's harder, and I'd be careful about mixing more things. And so having an illegal suite where it could run into bylaw enforcement, and then you're forced to handle that as a group. It's harder when you have one family and now a legal suite and the other family not. But that being said, it's easy to always say, let's have the best case. And for us, I think we probably wouldn't have been able to afford a house and do it in the best and safest and most legal case. So we don't, like, we have more than 3 unrelated adults in a home, and we work around that. But again, it comes down to our trust and willingness to work together. And we haven't been without conflict. We've definitely had conflict. We've had things fall apart at times, but the fundamental financial structure and our ethics around that and support around that for each other. For example, if by law enforcement came in, say we did have an illegal suite and they moved people out of it, we would all handle it together. And we would use our egalitarian principles to support those people and handle it. Realistically, the percentage chance of it happening is very small. So in a way, our commitment to each other, our flexibility and adaptability, is a form of insurance for each other. without having to put out that the money in that way. So we were able to sneak in a way with less kind of money and less insurance, because we have that informal, committed, essential system of trust and support for each other.
Wonderful. Thank you again. So I'm just going to. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Anyways, so listen, we have an interesting group here of people with diverse stories, but one thing we all do have in common is that you've all moved in with friends of varying degrees. I mean, I think Jennifer and Carter, you guys were strangers until you were neighbors, and then had been neighbors, it sounds like, for a little while first, 3 years. David, you knew the person who ended up buying from you in advance. Luke, your collective at least lived together in advance. And Leah, your parents moved in with close friends as well. The question we have here is, would anyone consider doing this without knowing a potential sharer? And certainly it is less common. Most of the people who are doing co-ownership are doing such with family members, with friends, or with strangers and acquaintances who they've at least gotten to know a little deeper before they've gone this far. But this is actually a good segue to talk about some of the initiatives that are happening right now, where groups of strangers are trying to come together because the land as such is appropriate, and the initiative and the opportunities are there. So, you know, this is more common with housing where you have little separate housing, like a situation like Jennifer and Carter's, where they have a house and a laneway house. Or for example, right now we're working with a group of people who are looking at acquiring a lot in Horseshoe Bay that has 8 cottages, actually on 3 lots, but 8 cottages on, so separate little properties. But to own it, you'd have to co-own it because they're on a single titled property. So you do see co-ops and collectives coming together in capacities like that. And you are seeing, so you see that examples in Vancouver. It could happen with things like heritage restoration homes with multiple suites in it, etc. So that model is possible. We're seeing examples of it in other parts of the world. In Australia, there's a group called Mortgage Mates who's putting partners together, and there's some groups in LA and other places, and Toronto. So, but it's certainly the most common practice currently is with friends and people, or at least people you've spent some time making sure that it's a good arrangement before you commit to that 5 to 10 year co-ownership phase. Any other comments about that from the panel?
Well, my dad always told me that a stranger is just someone you haven't met yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can second part of that. I think our I mean, I grew up in the world of marriage and nuclear family model was the only one for home ownership. And at least in my view, things are opening up and changing to different models. And so the word friend for me holds a lot of possibilities. That being said, of all the people we've had buy in and out, which has been a little bit more fluid system, we've had a deep level of trust with each one. And we've had some people come in a little bit easier who've invested in the collective but not lived here. Or, I mean, certainly lived here and not invested in it. But for someone to do both of those, there's a 1-year minimum of living together before they're allowed to invest in. And that's been really important. And we have always held caution until we're super sure with someone that they resonate in terms of our kind of values and primacy of this respect for agreements with each other.
Thank you. So thank you to all of our speakers today. Thank you to everybody who came and joined us. Really a great conversation, great examples and great models to look to here. Encourage folks to, again, to go to the CoHo website, to follow up with myself for a personalized consultation, or if you need a connection to any of these wonderful speakers to get more feedback from them or more ideas. And this video will be available online, so send it out to everybody you know. Have a wonderful evening, and we will see you hopefully at a future CoHo event. And once again, thanks so much to our 5 speakers for sharing your experience and your time. It was really fantastic. Have a good night, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Noam. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Noam. Nice to meet him.
Thanks all.